Welcome to the podcast of Data and Analytics in Business. We'll learn from the leading industry experts using data and analytics to solve the problems and create values in practice. We'll also learn where the industry is heading to and how data and analytics will shape the industry in the future. Most importantly, how they are preparing their business for digital transformation and disruption in the future. I'm your host, Jason Tan, and thank you for listening.
Hello, Jacob. Welcome to the Analytics Show podcast. So excited to have you here joining us today in this sunny afternoon that we finally do enjoy here in Brisbane.
Cheers for having me on, Jason.
Well, that's good. I from my research and I from talking to you in the past, I know you used to work as a blockchain developer. Given that the crypto is such a hot topic now with DeFi and NFT, tell us a little bit more about the experience working as a blockchain developer.
Yeah, had a great time. Worked with a lot of friends, building out different blockchain analytic products. Now that mycelium, whether it was kind of Chainlink Oracle analytics or DeFi products, really quite interesting space to be in during that time. Headed over to ETH Denver quite early on, and that was kind of the emergence of when DeFi was rolling out, and kept up to date and really enjoy that industry as well.
Knowing what you know today with the price of the Bitcoin and how hot is the NFT and DeFi, would you rather have stayed with the blockchain space then?
Well, really got quite passionate about CDR and open data and the potential innovation in Australia and trying to be an enabler for that Australian innovation. So definitely happy where I am, but don't get me wrong, Jason, I definitely have some toes in the crypto water.
Sorry, you mentioned about CDR. What do you mind to, for the listener and myself who are not educated in that space, what is CDR?
Yeah, so CDR stands for the consumer data right.
Yes.
And I guess the origin story of where it came from was the UK. So the UK rolled out an open banking framework, which legislated that every bank must open up their data rails as well as the payment rails, and what via API that is. And what this led to is that now developers and businesses start tapping into the bank programmatically to add value. And once you give those tools to the innovators, the developers, what we saw in the UK, quite a flurry of innovation rolled out, which was extremely interesting, and it led to products like Curve and kind of the origin stories of some of those neobanks rolling out throughout the UK and now going to the EU. And as we are, I guess, in Australia, we look what they're doing in the UK and we do a little bit better. So Australia rolled out the consumer data rights. They found that it wasn't just banking as a kind of, I guess, monopolistic sector or controlled. Banking as a sector is controlled by a few main parties. And it was extremely hard, I guess, for people to get home loans or have enough information to provide new services to the market. What Australia found, it's not just banking as a sector that is like that. It's also energy, telco, insurance, all these industries that we need to use in our daily lives. They really lack innovation, and there's actually no ability for developers to tap in and start innovating on top of them, because the data and the information for each consumer or individual is stuck in these silos of each provider or each industry. So what the consumer data right does, I guess, to wrap that all up, is it creates a general right that individuals have to use their data that is held at each of these institutions. Currently, the consumer data right is active in the banking sector, and this year it's opening up energy data, so that again, accredited providers like Fiskil, the company I'm with, can tap in and start allowing more developers to access that data.
Right. We're going to come back to this consumer data, right, a little bit more in details later. But it is certainly one of the topics that I really want to chat with you today. But first thing first, tell us a little bit more about your role as the founder and CEO and developer Freescale. And we'll talk a little bit about Freescale shortly as well.
Sure. So Fiskil is an open data API platform that allows businesses to connect to energy or banking data. Currently, we have a real core focus on banking and open banking. So I guess to unpack that a little further, our APIs allow any business to connect to their users' data, and that's real-time data at the moment, again, with the core focus on the banking side. So as an example, a typical use case is in the lending industry, where if you're applying for a home loan, at the moment, and historically, you've had to give over bank statements. And this is really archaic paper process, which no one likes to do. It sucks. So what open banking allows is that upon the user's consent, that lending application can actually tap into the user's banking data. But I guess one thing I'd touch on that is it's far broader than banking. We see every Australian business or every business broadly should be looking into the CDR, particularly open banking and the data sets that roll out, because lending is an obvious use case, but there's also e-commerce, for example. If you were a shopping platform like The Iconic, you could tap into your users' banking data and really give them a hyper-personalized experience to what is happening on their feed there and roll around that. And even in the payments sector currently, if someone is using a direct debit using open banking data, you can actually check if there's enough money in that account before that payment's made. So there is no chargeback fee, which can at volume save a lot of money. Or in a lot of Australian businesses in the payment space, they actually need to verify BSB and account number. And I've talked to many people, even the agricultural side or other businesses, where they're sent kind of manipulated BSB and account numbers by email. Other businesses, somehow fraud comes or digits are wrong, and they send millions of dollars to the wrong account number. So what Fiskil really does around that is provides an API platform so any businesses can tap into this data. And we really are kind of agnostic to the entire industry, allowing any business to pull down what data that they see fit to add a feature or service.
Right. So it sounds really exciting. I know, speaking to Jamie Leach, who is really big on the open data, I learned a little bit more about this. So I'm hoping to go even more detail into some of the technical stuff about the open banking and open data. Before we dive so much into that, I am curious to know from your view is why are open banking and open data so important in today's world and a future context?
Yeah, that's a good question. Often talking to people, it's really it kind of can get clouded around this open banking or open data concepts. And people ask, like, what is the point? And I think that the fundamental question there is, do you believe individuals should have access to their personal data? And that really comes down to a policy question as well. So fundamentally, as a company, we believe, yes, individuals should have access to their data. On the policy side, the CDR approach is addressing that and saying, yes, individuals should have via this consumer data right. And that is really gaining traction in many markets around the world now, that there should be this regulated push at institutions that individuals have to use. They should have the right to access the information in a user experience that makes sense. Now, that user experience is not pulling down CSV files, because then no other innovator or great tool or great software team can leverage that. So I think on that side, open data really allowing that individual to port the data is the most important bit, because again, you're giving that value to the strong team who has innovative solutions that haven't been addressed in the market yet. And with that ability to port, people often bring up, I guess, they flag the security question. Is that secure to take my data out of the bank? And to address that, I guess there's so many protocols, whether you're doing that with Google, Microsoft, that exist today, OAuth, OIDC, that already solve that problem. And for example, Jason, like, you could lock me in this room and probably put five padlocks on this door, and yeah, I am safe. I'm safe, but I don't really have the freedom to go do other things. And that's the same with the data stuck in these information silos at different institutions in Australia.
On that note, and let's dive into the consumer data right a little bit deeper. What do you think, or what are the development has caused the consumer to start thinking about this concept of the open data, and they are entitled to the access of their own data?
By that, do you mean the consumer looking into why open data makes sense?
Yeah, and why that is correct, and why that is exactly the question I have. Yeah.
So I think it's kind of, there's quite a variety of movements at the moment, which have led to a kind of a social change around data access and data privacy. Some areas have tried to address that. I guess there's GDPR, there's the blockchain movement, and there's also big tech, who are obviously under a fair bit of scrutiny. And it's certainly something that is coming to light quite quickly. I think where the consumer data right does it well and it plays is that it's simply giving the consumer the access to choose where they want to move their data at places they've never been able to do that before. And I think if a business is adding direct value to that user, it makes a lot of sense. And the adoption of this ecosystem will continue to thrive based off consumers making the decision that this application is going to provide me value. I'm more than happy to share my data there. And I think that's where the consumers will see and continue to see direct benefit.
It got me thinking, if we haven't seen how Facebook and Google are monetizing our data to make such a profit, do you think we could have the development of this open data concept?
Look, I think that's a loaded question. Facebook is running on, I guess, a marketing model because that's what they need to run on. They're under a lot of scrutiny because it is an extremely complex problem to be a social media company, and the amount of checks and balances that you need to have in place to kind of operate is insane. But at the same time, I also think the advertisement model exists in general news and subscription models, for example, from general news companies. So I don't think the direct blame is on them, but yeah, there's a clear issue around social media causing kind of algorithmic biases and people kind of going down the social media rabbit hole.
Now, coming back to this consumer data right in the banking sector, what are the challenges that come with this area?
So connecting to the consumer data right, there's really two main challenges. There's the business side and also the technical side. So on the technical side, you really have to build this pretty complex infrastructure to tap into this consumer data right ecosystem that's been created. And how that ecosystem really looks is it's a permission network of data sharers as well as data receivers. So building the pipes and maintaining those pipes to connect into these institutions isn't that easy. And then having that in a scalable way to provide data accurately to users is also probably one of the main challenges. There's also a large compliance challenge with the consumer data right, ensuring that data is stored and de-identified, ensuring that consumers know exactly what data is being accessed and it's very clear to them. and ensuring they're notified if there's any changes to their consent process. They're the main challenge around kind of building that process to integrate the consumer data, right? And I guess one thing I'd want to touch on there's often an industry talk, and everyone talks in classic enterprise and consulting levels, is whether to build a consumer data right integration or to buy integration. And in our opinion, this kind of relates to building, having servers on premises or using a cloud vendor like AWS or Azure. When you're building software, it's very difficult to build in-house. There's build costs, there's maintenance costs, there's delivery risks. What we provide is really a microservice architecture, a microservice in itself that anyone can plug into, and the rate that we push new features is extremely valuable. So talking to bank executives, you can confidently look them in the face and say that moving forward with a platform that manages the CDI infrastructure will be more cost effective in the long run.
Given that the data pipe that you mentioned earlier is moving pieces and then is changing and is ever evolving, how do you maintain to make sure the data pipe is from connecting to the bank is always working then?
Yeah, it's not an easy problem, but it's a variety of having solid testing frameworks and communicating to the banks and ensuring all of them are up to speed, and knowing when there could be a potential downside on their side as well. So I think a lot of it is around having best practices in testing and maintenance, and that's what we really focus on.
Can you give us an example of that best practices?
So I think it's just having really strong end-to-end tests to a variety of these institutions which we build out. And an institution will go down and sometimes they won't know why. And then that's where we come in to figure that out. And we often do report to some of the banks and help them get back up and running, or where their flow has failed, and send them an alert around that.
I know that the banks are equally building up their infrastructure in this space, especially for the big four banks. And how does it affect of what you are doing and what you are building in terms of the technology and the infrastructure at Freescale then?
For us, it doesn't matter too much. We can serve banks, but also there's an equal amount of every other Australian business who is looking to leverage this data, and the amount of industries that actually can leverage banking data but they don't look into it is quite vast. So we do constantly work with industries and fintechs, people in the property space, and really the list goes on around connecting into banking data and the value added services it can have, one, to their internal processes and just making them more efficient, and two, also just to add new features and personalizations to their users. And I think that's the really interesting piece. I guess an example of that would be Shopify. So Shopify began as a snowboarding company, an e-commerce snowboarding website. And then they moved into building out tooling so people can build their own e-commerce website. Mm-hmm. And now they're really moving into being one of Amazon's biggest competitors with the fulfillment side. And a part of that is that they actually leverage open banking data to now provide financial services to these e-commerce stores that are on their platform. And that they can provide instant loans because they leverage open banking data. They know the revenue churning through the e-commerce website. They also know the expenses directly from the bank account. And by doing that, over 50% of Shopify's revenue is really now in the financial services space.
So coming back to the topic of what the bank is building versus what you are building at Freescale, what would be the core and key differences between the two?
It depends where the route the bank is going down. So the banks need to comply and open up their APIs.
Yep.
And they open up their APIs to regulated providers like Fiskil. And since we are accredited and regulated, we can now tap in to that bank and access their API. Now it's become increasingly more apparent that banks, since they have complied, they really need to start competing in this space. So banks will, and they do want to start tapping into other banks. So that's when they will no longer just be giving out the data, they'll also be looking to receive it. Some, for example, CBA has looked to build that in-house. And I think that's because CBA has invested so much into their tech team and they have kind of proven that out. But most banks, it wouldn't make sense. It would be quite costly to even go down that route. And it actually is far more cheaper from a software perspective to plug in a provider. And it always will be the case. Again, back to that cloud versus on-prem item I was talking about before. So I think the banks are in a decision now where they're looking to start ingesting the data. And the reason they would do that is they can now start getting a complete picture of their user. Australia, the average Australian banks with 3 banks. We're quite a multi-bank nation, you could say. But by leveraging and pulling in other people's banking data, again, in that lending process, you can accurately know someone's income and expenses, which can allow you to kind of tweak those parameters of what you lend them a lot better and a lot more accurately. And so they can start doing that by tapping into different bank accounts rather than getting bank statements, which are potentially fraudulent. And where this whole CDR is going is that down the track, there will be ability to initiate actions. And part of that is to programmatically open a bank account. And you start seeing that roll out. And the most strong position there for these banks will be to have the most dominant apps, because then they can start moving users onto their banking app by opening accounts and switching them over based off the products available.
Right. So it seems like the space is really heating up, especially if they start building up their own tech in terms of to get receiving the data is really where the challenge, or at least where the competition is going to come to your side.
Yeah, and that's where we really come in, both for the banks and then again, any business looking to leverage that banking data. We've tapped into all the Australian banks, and you can pull in and start leveraging that data directly.
I love it. Now, recently I interviewed Jamie Leach. She is the chapter lead of F-Data, working to create more opportunities in open banking. I remember from that interview, she did mention that one of the major challenges in banking adopting the open banking was the enterprise system and platform. For the listener and myself who lack of the education and understanding in this space, can you help us to understand how this API infrastructure will help to overcome this problem with the existing enterprise system?
Yeah, so and Jamie's been great, actually. We're a member of F-Data, and she's done some great policy work on the CDR side. So most of the banks, like I was saying earlier, I guess all of these institutions have been built in kind of information silos, and yeah, some are on legacy systems, some aren't. Some more modern banking infrastructures have quite a strong architecture, but yeah, most are built on these kind of legacy systems. The problem they have faced is just the ability to move and open up this data, and then even receiving that data is probably not even in question for a lot of them, just because it's really hard to add new changes to these legacy systems because they don't really follow a more modern microservice model where you can plug in different components. But really where Fiskil comes in, the API comes in, is that all of these legacy systems now open their data to an API, which is fantastic. Now people can actually communicate with these legacy systems. Previously, that was just impossible. Where Fiskil comes in is you can imagine this fragmented infrastructure. We provide the API overlay that allows anyone to communicate to this fragmented infrastructure all through one API. So you can communicate to many banks via one API and provide, and we provide a lot of data quality and data analytics as that comes through to really ensure the data inconsistencies actually have direct value to businesses, so they don't have to focus on that. They can really focus on the core proposition.
Tell us a little bit more about the data and analytics side of the world that we can start doing in the open banking and also this API infrastructure.
For sure. So what we really focus on is ensuring the data is complete, the data is standardized, and that's a really important piece when we're talking to the developers on our platform, is ensuring that the data can actually, if I'm indexing into a piece of data, it's actually there, and that they all those API responses are the same, they're not different. So we enable that. On the analytics side, it's adding kind of categorizations to those transactions, and improving what that base bank provides us. So again, it can have further functionality to the businesses that utilize us. And then on the other side, the clients who are using us, I think there's a huge wealth of range of data analytics that's available, whether you're providing an algorithm to know the optimal amount for a consumer to save, or you're providing algorithms to validate the income spending. That's just a few I'm coming up with just off the spot. I think there's a wealth of things to do once the data is available, and we really focus on enabling any business or innovator to actually start providing more of those analytics and getting savvy.
I think there are quite a few things to unpack what you have to say. The first would be the data categorization. One of the things that you also got me thinking, and it's one of the things that I have been looking a lot, is about the data enrichment. So can you potentially source the data from other different sources and then help to enrich some of those transaction data or the credit card data, etc., to make the picture to be a lot more complete? Is that something that is on the scope, or anyone is already doing in the space of open banking?
Yeah, it's definitely on the scope and something we constantly pull in and definitely have some internal analytics around and doing some of that stuff and bringing in different data sets. And I think the wealth of data sets you can keep pulling in keeps expanding for the different use cases that are available. Again, energy data is coming onto the platform later this year, and that's something which is even more interesting, where you can start, I guess, combining banking and energy data to provide further value, whatever that crossover section may be, whether it's electricity financing or something down that route.
And coming back to the suggestion that where we were talking about where people could potentially build the algorithm based on top of those data, are you going down the road of making your platform to be the open source platform or open platform, especially in this context of the open banking then?
Yeah, and that's really kind of the philosophy we take. We really want to have enable anyone the ability to tap into this banking data and banking infrastructure without the complexities involved, so that it can just tap in, get data, and start making some analytics.
Wow, it's going to be huge. Has that philosophy already start appearing in the way that how you are building the platform, or is it more of something that you are looking to revolution yourself down the track?
No, that philosophy has already started. So I guess if any developers listening in, we are completely open and allow people to tap in and start moving down the track to leveraging this data and building out different solutions. So we have a very open policy, and just can reach out and start going down the route to getting access to open banking.
Fantastic. And I remember from the past, I think you mentioned something a little bit about Sandbox, for people who are not necessarily familiar with the concept of the Sandbox. I know Sandbox is quite a thing, especially from the regulatory framework for this open banking. Would you share with us a little bit more about this whole Sandbox concept from the regulatory perspective?
So from the regulatory perspective, there currently doesn't really exist a sandbox for open banking. There's some, I guess, general standards out and repositories, but they don't really cover the full realm you'd be looking for in a sandbox. We do provide a sandbox with mock data that replicates the integration into open banking. And yeah, again, you can just sign up and start tapping in it and build a proof of concept. I think that's where it all starts for any business or developer, and then look at going live straight after that.
Can you explain a little bit more?
Yeah,
what
sure.
exactly is Sandbox?
Sure. So a sandbox is when you'll integrate our APIs, which is not that many lines of code, really quite quickly. But the sandbox is when you're tapping into mock data that's made to replicate a real bank account, and kind of what that person's transactions would be like. So that's a testing environment to get your proof of concept up and running, to understand how open banking really works. So you would typically start in the sandbox test mode and play around with text transactions. And once that is in a solid state, you then look to go live and start pulling down real live transactional data and allowing that to flow through the platform.
Is it difficult to apply for access to use the Sandbox?
No, just reach out and you can get access immediately.
Wow, that's amazing. So tell us, where are you at in terms of Freescale? When are you looking to introduce the Freescale to the world? Productize it and then available to access in production stage.
Well, we are available. I think it's just reaching out and then getting access to that sandbox environment and then moving on to live. So we're already working with clients on the way to live. And yeah, I think the main thing is just reaching out. We're good to go on that front.
Good stuff.
And I guess to talk to that further, we do connect into it's over 70 banks at the moment, and it's most of the entire coverage of Australia. And one thing with that as well, it's both business bank accounts as well as consumer bank accounts. So it's not just a consumer integration. The interesting side as well, I think, so is on the SME side and the SME cash flow analytics that can be done. That's actually really missing in today's market.
So given of what you have seen so far, can you share with us a few innovation where how the innovator are assessing your data and using this open banking data to come up something that is innovative?
There's a variety at the moment. There's a few kind of still working through, but whether it's an application that will use an algorithm to automatically save you the right amount of money, that's quite interesting. And it's an algorithmic process to what you should be taking out this week based off your upcoming bills. Previously, personal financial management has been kind of seen as a couple of dashboards, and look at some pretty lights. but I think with the advent of open banking and machine learning moving forward, it can really start taking over a little bit more. That sounds bad from an AI perspective, but it can really start providing more value to you. Even in the kind of property space, if you're applying for a rental home, you can just tap into someone's banking data. And yeah, there's quite a wide range that keeps coming through. Even on a credit card, for example, you could start using open banking data to aggregate the data of one card onto one actually singular card. You could have multiple cards connected to it. That becomes quite interesting.
What would be your favorite use cases so far?
My favorite use cases are the ones that are extremely different. So, and I think there's more that are slowly coming down. So outside the lending side, outside of typical buy now, pay later. Favorite use case though. I think I'm quite interested in that card use case. It's quite interesting where you can aggregate multiple cards into one. But yeah, I think my favorite use cases changes each week. I'm sitting back and just the power is in allowing the developers to really surprise you, I think.
Now, for those developers who are excited to dive into the realm of the open banking and open data, what would be your advice for them?
I think just get started, start building. Feel free to reach out, get the Sandbox environment. I think start building, create the proof of concept, and move forward. I think build is my number one go to market strategy. Just build.
I love it.
It depends what stage you are as well. If you're a current business executive or something looking like that, you can really map out the process around to going live, and I think that makes a lot of sense. And again, just reach out. We're more than happy to go down that route.
Wonderful. Now, this is almost coming to the end. I have two final questions for you. Number one, what is your most important first principle?
That's an interesting question. Most important first principle, I think it would be to kind of to really have, I guess, individual thought in the way you process different things. Really analyzing things probably from first principles and analyzing them natively to what will work and what you think will work, not the people around you, and then having opinion around that. So I think individual thought is a great first principle. I'll push you through it. That's what I'm pull out there.
I love it. What is one book that you have read and thought it would have been better for your younger self to have?
When I was young, I really enjoyed Lord of the Flies, but I guess that was when I was young. Probably a book that I read, Think and Grow Rich, was quite interesting. And that was really around, again, probably tying to the last question, the power of thought. And it really dives into the kind of philosophy around the way people can do miraculous things. And that kind of phrase is, the man who can is the man who thinks he can. So that was quite interesting, and it has a lot of kind of takeaways from that book.
Who is the writer of the book, if you happen to remember?
Napoleon Hill.
Napoleon Hill. I think I know him. I have heard
It's
of
pretty,
him.
yeah.
Thank you so much.
No problem.
Really learned a lot about the open banking today and open data. Super excited about to see the development in this space. I hope the listener will be inspired by many of these things that you shared, and really help to help to bring up the innovation speed of the open banking and open data.
Yeah, thank you. Really enjoyed the call, Jason. And if anyone does want to get onto that Sandbox, it's fiskil.com.au.
Wonderful. I'll make sure to put the link in there, and so that people can access to this the Sandbox. Thank you so much, Jason.
Appreciate it, Jason.